Good afternoon. I'm Jen Hughes, Design Specialist at the National Endowment for the Arts Design Program. Thank you for joining us today in what will be the second in a series of webinars on the topic of social impact design. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping rules. You are all muted and will only be able to hear us, the presenters. We will give a PowerPoint presentation for the first half of the hour, followed by an interactive Q&A session. You can submit questions or comments at any time by using the Q&A box below the PowerPoint on your screen. Today's webinar will spotlight successful projects happening in the field of social impact design, or the practice of designing for public benefit, especially in disadvantaged communities. We will be live tweeting at NEA Arts using the hashtag social impact design, so please feel free to join in the conversation. If you haven't already, I'd encourage you to take time to download our white paper released in February, Design and Social Impact, a cross-sectoral agenda for design education, research, and practice. Published by the Smithsonian's Cooper Hewitt National Design Museum in conjunction with the National Endowment for the Arts and Lemelson Foundation, this publication sets the stage for advancing this field of work. The webinars build on the white paper and discussions that began during the Social Impact Design Summit held in February of 2012 and are intended to further enhance the field's capacity to design effectively for social impact. All webinars will be recorded and archived to be posted in the podcast, webcast, and webinar section of www.arts.gov, so you can always go back and refer to them in the future. I invite you to review the archive of our first webinar and to join us for our next webinar, Educating the Next Generation of Social Impact Designers. Before I pass the torch over to our guest presenters today, I want to bring to your attention an upcoming funding opportunity with the NEA, the Design Artworks Grant Program. Two of our presenters lead organizations that have been supported by NEA Artworks, Center for Urban Pedagogy and Design Impact. You will be hearing from them shortly. We invite nonprofit 501c3 organizations with 3 years of programming history, units of state or local government, or federally recognized tribal communities to apply to the August 8th deadline. Design competitions, charrettes, community workshops, design commissions, design research, festivals, and education are among the many eligible activities. Please visit www.arts.gov for additional details and instructions on how to apply. Now, I'd like to introduce you to our guest panelists today. Each panelist will run through a quick introduction to a project that their organization led. Then I'll kick off a conversational Q&A session and invite you to participate by typing your questions in the Q&A box. As a reminder, you can type in a question at any point during the webinar, and we'll get to them in our session, in the second half of the session today. First, we'll begin with a presentation by Kate Ho Jolla from Design Impact, followed by Dr. Ted Ho Jolla from Indigenous Planning and Design Institute and University of New Mexico School of Architecture and Planning, followed by Christine Gasper from the Center for Urban Pedagogy. Kate will kick us off. Kate is an executive director and co-founder of Design Impact, a nonprofit public interest design firm that believes in the potential of a design as a powerful tool for creating social change. She also happens to be an NEA Artworks grantee. D-Impact embeds professional designers with innovative nonprofits, spreads design capability through social design curriculum development, and consults with organizations on design project interventions. So Kate, I'd like you to take it away.
Great. Thanks, Jen, for that introduction, and thanks to all of you for tuning in today. This is a really exciting opportunity for us to learn as well and being in conversation with you all. I'm just going to start by giving a short kind of overview of who we are, and then I thought it would be most beneficial for you guys to maybe just hear a deep dive into one of our projects to give you an idea of how we work. So as Jen said, my name is Kate Anissian. I'm the co-founder of Design Impact. And the goal of what we want to do is really figure out how to connect design to the social sector. So design's historically played a really strong role in business, and we're really interested in how can we use it in the social sector for how can community leaders that are addressing some of today's kind of most pressing problems have access to design as a problem-solving process. And the way we were really interested in pursuing that model was through something that we called embedded design. So while design historically often works in a consultant-based role, we were interested in more in what happens when you embed design within a nonprofit or within a low-income community over time to work on a particular problem or service, or product or service solution. What we were interested in is not only how does that change the relevancy of the product or service solution or make it more appropriate, but can it also model design thinking over time as an empowerment tool so that you don't always maybe necessarily need a designer to go through a design process, but so that nonprofit or organizations can use the process on their own. And so that's what we were interested in, but we really wanted to test it. So we had an opportunity to work actually in India with an organization called ODOM to start our work. And we ran a 2-year pilot project where we lived in a village of about 5,000 people. And we worked on 2 pilot projects. One was a fair trade soap project, and one was a charcoal briquette project, which if you're interested, you can check out our website to learn more about that. But we took the learning from those projects and we applied it to start an international fellowship program. During that time, we were getting a lot of emails from designers saying they were interested in doing this kind of work, and also we're talking to other nonprofits and NGOs and social enterprises that were interested in getting some design help. And so we thought, why not connect the dots and start a fellowship program where we would connect designers with those innovative NGOs. And that model really relies on the strength of the relationship between the NGO partner and the designer. So we hire professional designers that have at least 3 to 5 years of experience to go live and work in an embedded way for 10 months with nonprofit organizations. And that's been the majority of the work we have done over the past 3 or 4 years. And those designers have worked on multiple types of design projects. So we've run 11 projects in India. They range from biomass stoves to curriculum development to a product that deals with malnutrition. And you can check out all those projects on our website. And we just finished our 2nd cohort of fellows. So the fellows came from not just the U.S., but we've had a fellow from Colombia, Ireland, as well as India. And the model has really allowed us to provide design services to nonprofits that typically couldn't afford it. So we're really not aiming at very large, well-established nonprofits that can afford access to design. We're really trying to bring design where it typically hasn't been, so in grassroots nonprofits or medium-sized nonprofits. And so just with this cohort of fellows alone, we've provided over about 6,000 hours in design residence, as well as engaged over 800 people in a design thinking or a design process. So that's kind of the majority of our work, but we also do run workshops and programs for those people where the fellowship model hasn't fit that really are about developing social design curriculum. So that's kind of an overview of what we do, but I thought that the best way to introduce our work, as I said, might be through a project lens. So today I'm going to talk about our program with the Quest Alliance. So Quest Alliance is an NGO based out of Bangalore, India, and their focus is to do job training, life skills, and work readiness programs for Indian youth, particularly those youth that have dropped out of the educational system and are really at risk of kind of living below that international poverty line. So they're really targeting those kids and making sure that they have access to training and life skills programs that get them jobs. And you can see, I know these pictures are a little squished, but you can see the 2 fellows that have worked on that project. So the first fellow on the left was Ali Mayorano, and the second was Eva Miller, who was on the right. And both Ali and Eva come from kind of a more traditional corporate design background. Ali came to us from Frog, where she'd worked for companies like Chase and Disney, AT&T. Eva, similar, had worked for Intel, Nike, Stanford, WebMD. And both of them kind of said, you know what, I want to make a career transition. I really want to do something that gives back to a community in a certain way and also learn from that experience. And so they embedded themselves in India within the Quest organization. So, oops, let's click this next one. Yeah, so the design brief, the problem that we were working on with Quest asked us to look at their entire life skills and job training curriculum. They said, look, we're doing this life skills training, but we really want to update it and improve it. And the way we want to do that is by creating a web-based learning management system. So we want all of our facilitators, all of our students to be able to access the curriculum that we're doing through a web-based program. And they right now have over 500 facilitators and over 200 locations around India. They're reaching over 11,000 students. So they really wanted to be able to take that and scale it. And so the other thing they're really interested in is not just the quantity of the individuals that they're reaching, but the quality of the individuals they're reaching. So they really focus on active learning, which is the desire to change the role of the traditional teacher, the kind of chalk and talk model, and move that to one of a facilitator and switch the responsibility of learning to the learners. And so what that meant for our design process is that we really had to look at some active learning curriculum that we could develop into the web-based system as well as what would happen in the classroom. And so the process used by our fellows was really a typical design process. It started with defining the problem through embedded research. Allie did journal studies, interviews, observations. And Allie's early project focus was on the facilitator. So she really wanted to focus on making sure those facilitators were trained in a way that they felt supported, because there's a really high turnover rate for those facilitators, and we all know that's not really what we want in classrooms. And so Allie worked on revamping the facilitator training from the facilitator standpoint by meeting and working with facilitators to hear where they needed more support. And then Eva moved on and really started to work on the system design itself of that web-based system. So you can see here, this is, I think, kind of this is the embedded model in action, is that this is Allie really developing content with the team all the time. So as I said, we've been working with Quest now for over a year and a half, living and working every day with their team. And so part of that is also so that they build design capacity into their organization. And they were kind of interesting. They were an NGO that didn't have a designer beforehand and now have full-time design staff, because it's something they've really recognized as a really important thing for them to add to their projects. And the other thing is that we really had to weave together both the online curriculum as well as the classroom curriculum. And you can see here, this is the learning management system prototype that Eva developed. This is still kind of in the wireframe standpoint, but after doing user profiles, content framework, prototyping activities, all with the students and facilitators in context over 10 months, she's developed this content model. So you can see here, this is if you were a student going through their Quest job training curriculum, you can see what your progress would be, get feedback, give feedback on the program, see what you need to work on and what's coming up next. And this is also really good for facilitators because they can see all of their students and the progress they're making. And so Eva moved this kind of from a low fidelity wireframe with just post-it notes to high fidelity, and right now it's kind of at the straw man stage where all of the participants and constituents are further refining it and having conversation on how to finalize it. And so then it'll probably take another 10 months or so for this to go live. But the outcomes that we hope from this kind of project is to improve those facilitators' engagement so they feel more empowered and they understand their students better, they can give feedback, and therefore increase their retention. Also to increase student engagement in the curriculum. So this is really clickable, it's really available, it was built around what students articulated they wanted and what they wanted to see. And so hopefully that, again, directly relates to their success in the program. And thirdly, it's going to help improve Quest internal tracking system. So Quest now understands what's working, what's not, who's engaged, who's not, and how are they doing at any given moment. And so therefore it's a scalable solution for them. So this is, again, this is just one example. So we have, as I said, 11 projects that we've worked on. I would love for you to take a look at them on our website. Feel free to contact me if you have any questions. And this is just one overview, but hopefully it gives you an idea of how our fellows work with organizations and a little bit more about the embedded design process. Thanks.
Great, thanks Kate, and hopefully as we move into the Q&A session, we'll certainly be able to touch on some of your additional projects and programming. That was really great to learn about the Quest project. So next, I'd like to move on to our next presenter. We have Dr. Ted Ho Jolla, a distinguished professor and Regents Professor in the Community and Regional Planning Program, School of Architecture and Planning at the University of New Mexico. He is enrolled tribal member of the Pueblo of Isleta and runs the Indigenous Design and Planning Institute, whose goal is to educate by engaging faculty, students, professionals, and policy leaders in culturally appropriate design and planning.
Greetings from sunny and smoky and very hot New Mexico. Um, I am so excited to be able to sort of share some of the initiatives that we've been embarking on. Our Indigenous Design and Planning Institute actually is very short-lived. We were established in the fall of 2011, and essentially we operate as an interdisciplinary unit within the School of Architecture and Planning here at the University of New Mexico, and work with the Community and Regional Planning Program, the Architecture Program, and the Landscape Architecture Program. So you heard a little bit about our mission, but really we're founded on one basic and fundamental principle, and that is to use a value-based approach to community development. So when we partner with groups that are interested in exploring some of these kinds of issues, the first thing we do is we sort of distinguish the fact that they actually are ready and willing to engage in this kind of process. And we found actually in our experience that some are and some aren't. And then we also want to make sure that these communities then will take ownership of the process in the final end of whatever it is that we partner with in terms of accomplishing things. So we're funded by the CERDNA Foundation, which supports a lot of our administrative efforts, and we also have a $1.3 million endowment that we've generated and are continuing to add on to that. And then we also have small tribal contracts that we have with our partners and our participants, and most of that funding really goes to support the field activities of what it is that we do. So this map here of New Mexico shows the kind of distribution of projects that we're engaged in. Right now we have 8 active projects, and actually I forgot to include the Pueblo of Zuni. We're going to be doing a project with them on Main Street, which actually is the first one in the nation funded for a tribal community. And we've got 2 that we've completed thus far, and I'm going to be talking about one of these, which is Isleta del Sur, that you see just outside on the southern boundary of New Mexico. And we've got 3 more that are actually in the proposal and negotiation stage. All the projects are done at different sort of scales. We have student graduate projects where we really emphasize capacity building, essentially because the students from many of these working on these projects are actually from those communities. We have faculty mentored projects. We also work in the classroom, in the studio, and we also develop research and design teams. And I won't have time to go into all the different projects that we've got, but they cover the gamut of everything from environmental justice to historic preservation. Of course, you know, we're feeling the weight of global warming here, so we're dealing with ecosystems and how they impact the society, the politics, the economy, and we also are engaged in projects that also explore the whole issue of cultural assets. Our area is primarily within the New Mexico region, and within our reach, we have approximately 24 tribes. They're Apache, Pueblo, and Navajo, and they represent approximately 11% of our state population and 11% of the total lands that are held in federal trust for these communities. So I want to move on very quickly to the project that I want to really briefly talk about, and this is the Isleta del Sur. It's a community that was founded way back in the 1680s as a result of the Pueblo Revolt, and it was founded at the same time as El Paso, Texas. It's had a very interesting history. It lost federal recognition, which wasn't restored until 1968. It's about 1,600 in population. And when they first contacted us about being able to give them assistance, they were talking about new urbanism. And of course, at that point, I had a meltdown because they don't need to invent things. They already have traditions that have sustained them. So our challenge was how to bring that conversation to bear. So this particular diagram shows the kind of complexity of the land area that we're dealing with. Those that are in the sort of brown palette are the lands which they currently have and are either privately owned or in trust. And then as part of the process, we're also recommending that they begin to deal with bringing lands in a much more strategic way in terms of trying to rebuild their capacity. But we looked at how it is that we deal with connectivity. And that was essentially the whole issue behind their cultural identity and looking at how they could reclaim their streetscapes, their lands, their acequias, which are their ditch systems, and also beginning to sort of hone in on what really represents a historic district for them and how it is that they could respond to having an approach where people were more respectful about the lands which they themselves maintain over the long term. This particular diagram essentially is the kind of process that we go through. It shows essentially what we can call the life cycle of a community. And the red line there basically indicates a person's life cycle and outlines then the responsibility that a community has in order to be able to nurture and move them through life. So those principles that are there then attend to how they actually assume their roles and responsibilities. And then the linear part is what is it that is already in the community, the institutions then that actually then serve them. And actually through that conversation then we identified potential areas and institutions that represented gaps, which then we use as a way in order to get them to think about how they want to deal with priorities. This is called the 7 generations model. It's essentially a resiliency model. It deals with respecting the past, informing the present, and adapting towards the future. This diagram shows in the conversation how we synthesized the kinds of values that should drive the type of community development. And in particular, our role, of course, is how do you translate these into design and planning. So we see assets and opportunity. We give voice to the community. We use what we call a transformative approach, where generations then are looking at the basic time frame rather than what planners ordinarily tend to use as 5, 10, and 50. And we also challenge them to sort of tell us a story about their worldview and how that worldview then has essentially informed how it is that they exist today. So here's a very quick example of the kind of things that we have the capability of doing. This is an area that they've slated to do some business development that's within their village proper. And in the process of our engagement, we gave some voice and began to start putting design elements so that the undeveloped lot that really represents this kind of bleak landscape then can become an opportunity for their imagination. So this is the re-rendering of that same plot, and there's lots of things that are attendant in there that sort of help translate that, but we're looking at things like how do you develop safe streetscapes, how do you slow the pace of the community so that people can actually enjoy it, how do you use cultural representation in the landscape, developing green canopies for an environment that's very hot and very cold during the seasons. And in particular, how do you build meaning and give them ownership of the way that they can imagine their place and time. So this essentially is the sort of process that we go through, and really it's much attendant to allowing them to exercise their full rights and responsibilities, what we call sovereignty, and that, of course, is just taking care of their own people.
Great, thanks, Ted. Great to learn about that project as well, and I think it's great fodder for a lot of discussion we want to have here today. So finally, I'd like to introduce our third and last presenter, Christine Gasper. She is Executive Director of the Center for Urban Pedagogy, a nonprofit whose mission is to use art and design to increase meaningful civic engagement, particularly among historically underrepresented communities. She partners with designers and community organizations to create visually based educational tools that help demystify complex issues from zoning law to sewage infrastructure. So I'd welcome you, Christine, to share your presentation with us.
Great, thank you. Thanks so much for having me as part of this conversation. It's so great to hear about the other projects that have already presented. So this is an image of some of PUP's work. This is what we do with the complex policy and planning issues that we work on. We sort of turn them into these different kinds of visuals that help people understand how they work. So the images here are a workshop tool about zoning, a scale model of New York City's water infrastructure that looks like combined sewer overflow, a video about who owns the internet, and then a pamphlet about predatory equity. And I'm going to talk a little bit about our process and then show you an example of a specific case study. So our projects begin usually with our staff putting out a call for community organizations and advocacy groups who'd like to collaborate with us. And we're looking for groups who have a complex policy or planning issue that's impacting their constituency. They're really seeing the kind of negative impacts of it or the negative impacts that are coming down the road towards them. And they come to us for help breaking that issue down. So we're looking for groups that have, whoops, I should go to the next slide. We're looking for groups that have a specific constituency that they connect with. You know, they're really on the ground with the particular issue. And we pick those partners through a jury process. So we have a jury every year with 2 people with art and design backgrounds and 2 people with organizing and advocacy backgrounds. And they're really good at helping us to pick good partners. They look at things like the capacity of the group. They look at how much the issue could really benefit from visual explanation. They often have their ears to the ground about what other groups are working on, so they have a sense of, hey, this is something we keep hearing about. We know that if you guys make this tool, a lot of other groups will benefit from it too. So that's sort of built into our selection process. And then we put out, once we have the 4 topics, we do 4 topics a year. Once we have the topics, we put out a call for designers. And the jury, again, helps us pick designers to partner on these projects. And we work with a broad range of designers. They're typically graphic designers, but we've also worked with illustrators. We just did a project with a photographer. So they're people that are really good at breaking down information in visual ways. And then our process is to really have an in-depth collaboration with all these players at the table. So our staff, the organization we're working with, their members will inform the process as well and work with us throughout the process, and the designer. And we make sure that we all understand the policy issue that we're looking at so that so then we can break it down and create a visual explanation of it in some sort of tool that we can then distribute to people. And then the distribution is the final piece of it. So we're really looking to make sure that all the tools that we make have a use in the world, and we do that by making sure that the people that will benefit from it are part of the design process from the beginning through our collaboration with the community group. So this is, I always say, this is what policy looks like in the wild. It's not so pretty, it's not really accessible, but it has, pretty tremendous impacts on our lives. So this is one of many, many pages of New York City street vending code. And this is the impact of us not being able to understand those policies. This is a box full of citations from the New York Police Department. Each one of those little pink slips of paper can cost $1,000, and New York City street vendors earn on average $14,000 a year. So there's a tremendous impact on these communities. Street vendors are often recent immigrants. It's often, one of their first jobs in this country. It's a really tough job. Obviously, the money is not great. We also found out that the police are not super familiar with the policy, so they sometimes write incorrect tickets or tickets that are actually not a violation. But the vendor still loses a day of work when they go to court to fight the ticket. So there's a tremendous impact here. And the hand in that box belongs to Sean Baczynski. And he's the director of an organization called the Street Vendor Project, which is a membership organization of New York City street vendors. And he came to us through the Making Policy Public program with this issue and wanted to work with us to help break down some of the pieces of the policy that impacted his members. And so we worked with him and with a designer named Candy Chang on this project. And we work closely with the membership of Street Vendor Project. So this is a member meeting. We were able to get feedback from them throughout the process. One of the things that we heard from them, you'll see the tool in a second, but one of the things we heard from them during the process was that the visual direction we were going in was maybe a little bit too cartoony, and they wanted to make sure that it looked official enough so they could show it to a police officer if they were contesting whether or not they were being written a citation for a law that actually existed. So they wanted to be able to have a conversation around that and have something they could show to a police officer. So things like that really end up informing the visual direction that the project takes. And it's unusual for designers to have that kind of access in a design project as well. Often the client that they're working for isn't the end user of a project. So the designers we work with are usually very excited to have the opportunity to do that. And then this is the tool that we made. So in the Making Policy Public program, we always have the same format. So it starts out with 8.5 by 11 and it unfolds to a poster. And you can see that the project is really visually based, so most of the information is conveyed through diagrams. Where there is text, it's written in 5 different languages, which are the languages primarily spoken by the street vendors here. Here's another image. I mean, some of the things are really basic. They're just dimensions, how far away from the door of a building you're supposed to be, or how far from the edge of the curb your table can be. And then the poster spread really has a lot of information about the history of street vending in New York, some of the other laws that impact vendors, just to help increase awareness of this, kind of landscape. Street vendors are such a fixture of the landscape here in New York, and people really like them, but people don't really think about the challenges that they're facing. So Street Vendor Project also uses this to just increase awareness about some of the issues impacting vendors. And so we ended the project with distribution. So when this project launched, we went out with CUP volunteers and Street Vendor Project volunteers into all 5 boroughs and handed out the posters to vendors all over the city. The Street Vendor Project uses this pretty regularly in their work now. So this came out 3 years ago, and it's been used pretty continuously since then. And then about 2 years ago, an organization called Midtown Community Court came to us and started ordering copies of this because they run a training program for street vendors who have had multiple violations. And so they started using this publication as part of their training to help vendors understand some of the key rules. And then this is just the whole set of Making Policy Public issues that we've created to date. So there are 12 that we've done, and we have 4 more in the works this year. And this is how to find out more about Making Policy Public and our other projects. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much, Christine. It was great to learn more about the Making Policy Public program. And thanks to all of our presenters for those compelling presentations and insights into your work. Now we'll move into the Q&A session. And as I mentioned before, I invite all of you audience members out there to participate by submitting a question to the Q&A box on your screen at any time. We've already seen a few questions come through, so we'll certainly get to those right away. To start us off, I had a few questions myself and also have heard from the field, and I thought we could perhaps delve into those from the start of this conversation, and each of you touched on it in your presentation, but a lot of inquiries come about in terms of social impact design around the client-designer relationship. Kate, I know you talked about embedded design, and Ted really talked about sovereignty and the role of community ownership, as well as Christine in your presentation about the role of the street vendors. And you're working with your clients and communities in a very thoughtful, embedded way. Oftentimes we do hear, though, that an ongoing critique of social impact design is that some designers approach their work with the attitude, I'm a designer and I'm here to help. Ted, I was hoping you could maybe kick us off here and just react to that statement and talk about the ways in which you empower your clients to really be a part of the planning process for their communities.
Sure. I think the most important thing to understand is that we're a state institution, and our tribes essentially are also part of that community. And
Ted,
the result of
Ted,
that is,
I'm
yeah,
sorry to interrupt. Could you just speak up a little bit louder so we can
sure.
hear you real nice and clearly? Great, thank you.
Okay, so part of that, I guess, protocol that you would sort of engage in is historically these state institutions have not been accessible to the tribes, nor have they actually ever considered that, yet they send their students here, and unfortunately it turns out to be sort of out of sight, out of mind. So one of the things that we're really attendant to is to work with them and identify their students and also use that as a way to build capacity within the tribes in order to be able to give them the opportunity to actually feel that this place can be a resource for them.
Great. Kate or Christine, do you have sort of thoughts to add to that? And I know that you both touched on it with the case studies you provided, but could you talk a little bit more, maybe starting with Kate, on how you ensure representation by sort of the client throughout your process that you're really working to serve, and sort of how do you get a designer embedded in the work in a way in which they really have a cultural understanding and can form that true partnership in the project?
Sure. Yeah, I think this is a really important issue. I think it's something that we've really tried to address head on from the beginning. I think it's difficult. It's kind of easy to say that you're going to do, but I think it takes a lot of attention, and I think it's something we work on and are always working on. Especially because I think that kind of charity-based model can create an us-them paradigm or an unequal power dynamic, so that you're starting on kind of, if you were helping someone, quote unquote, you're assuming that they need help. You're in an unequal power relationship, which we feel is a pretty bad way to start a relationship. So I think that, yeah, we do a few things. We kind of hit it from a lot of different angles to try and make sure that we're addressing that issue. One is partnering with community-based nonprofit organizations. We really look for organizations that have members on their staff that are from the community they're serving, or at the very least, have, like, it's very obvious and very clear that community members feel very safe, comfortable within the confines of that organization. So that's really important to us, so that whoever we're partnering with is representative of the constituency they're serving in some way, shape, or form, so that we're really paying attention to listening to the right voices. And then secondly, that embedding process, right now we had a 10-month model. We've thought about, really, we'd love to extend it. There's other ramifications that make that harder. But really, the longer you can spend is really doing that relationship building allows your client's voice to come in, day out, in every step of the process, so that, like, every single time you're making a design change, not only can they give feedback, but they can be doing the process themselves. I mean, that's something we try and really do, is say, well, what part of this design process can you actually lead? That takes time, but I think that is another way to ensure a client's voice is by asking them to take kind of the design driving over, and that can create some really interesting conversations and a lot of really good learning back and forth. And so the third thing we kind of try and do is just emphasize the importance of client community voice in our identity as an organization. So in our fellowship training, which is about a week long, fellows hear from cultural experts from different parts of India. We really coach them on how to gain feedback, how to listen, how to observe, and then our focus is really on user-centered design, so making the user the center of the design process. And even in our tweets, we've been trying to just make them voices of the community, so that that's something that we're making sure we're listening and putting out there. And we look for designers that approach their work with a sense of humility and curiosity in our interviews and the things that we do. And I think kind of all of that culminates in our focus on relationship building. So our first step of our embedded process is immersion, and we really just ask our fellows to hang out for a while. So sometimes we don't even suggest starting on the project right away. That part of it is just about building a relationship, and the relationship is about an equal exchange between two people. And what does that mean? And we talk about what that means. We ask them to reflect on that, and that's part of their goal, is just to build relationship. And I think it's so easy for us to get really wrapped up and excited about the design process itself and getting to the end goal of the project. But I think sometimes we miss, by just focusing on the ends, we miss the means. And so that's something we try and do. I think it's an ongoing process, but that's kind of some of the ways that we wrap that into the work that we do.
Great. And Christine, I thought, in a way to sort of build on this question, I know that Kate really touched on the design process, and we have some questions sort of delving in and wanting to have a better understanding about sort of what the process is for choosing the projects that CUP works on, and also how do you go about both selecting the client but also matching them with a designer that's really capable to grasp the complex issues that might be challenging in sort of the client project as it's proposed?
Sure. Let's see. So in terms of picking the project, I kind of went over that. For this program, we have a jury process. Every year we pick a jury with 2 people who are leaders in the art and design world and 2 people that are leaders in advocacy and organizing. And they really help us pick the project. So we have, we put out an open call for applications. We'll get maybe 70 applications, and then we'll work with the jury to weed it down to, usually we get down to about 8 or 10, and then we conduct interviews with the finalists to just make sure they have capacity, make sure they understand how the program works, see if they have any questions for us, ask any follow-up questions that the jury has raised. And then from that, we suggest 4 to the jury that we think are the strongest, and it's usually the 4 that they've rated the highest as well, unless there's something unusual that happened. So we go back to the jury with those, and then they approve them. And then we put up a brief for each of those projects, and we put out a call for designers that want to collaborate on those projects. And sometimes designers will apply to work on a specific project. Sometimes they'll be interested in working on any of them and just more interested in the collaboration opportunity, so it varies. And then we have the same jury come back and help us pick the designers. So they know the projects pretty well at that point. They're looking for designers that kind of will match up. So, if there's a project that we know is going to have a lot of data in it, they'll look for a designer that has some sort of infographic, capability. But beyond that, they often make really unusual pairings. Like, we had a graphic novelist one year that worked with us, and she ended up getting selected to work on a project about the juvenile justice system, which was such a great match, and we were so excited that happened, and that's been one of our most successful projects. So that's really the process that we use. And then, and we have a pretty in-depth application process information we're looking for from participants. And then in terms of managing the designer's role and the process. So what's really critical in our model is that CUP is a really significant participant in all of our projects. So we don't pair a designer up with an organization. We've seen that happen sometimes. I think there's some organizations that do that kind of thing that have just a, helping connect people across. But that's pretty different than our model. So we actually think that one of the biggest barriers, and actually Kate talked about this a lot in her work and the way that D-Impact has structured their their fellowships to address this issue is, there are a lot of barriers to people working with design when they haven't worked with it before, and so it takes a long time and it takes a lot of work to kind of bring them around. So CUP staff actually play that role, so we really facilitate all the collaborations. We bring together, we kind of coordinate all the meetings and we do all those sort of administrative things, but we also facilitate the conversations. And so one of the things we spend a lot of time doing is helping, community groups who have never worked with a designer before develop a language of design critique, which is often unusual to them. And sometimes they feel like, oh, we're so excited that you guys are doing this project with us. We don't want to make you feel bad about it, even though we don't like something. But if people don't like it, then that means they're not going to use the end product that will go on a shelf. So we want to make sure it's really useful. So we help them to just break down their critique into small questions they can ask themselves about their reactions, helping them develop the design language. One of our goals is that the impact of the program is that groups that have worked with us have an increased capacity to take on a design partnership in the future without us being present because of the skills that they've gained. So those are some of the things. And then sort of going back to this issue of the designer partner dynamic, we really see the community group as an expert in the topic that we're working on. So that's also a nice balance that we have in the project where they come with a certain expertise and the designer has a certain expertise and then CUP has a certain expertise. So we're all kind of valued within the project in different ways.
That's great. That gives us a great sort of frame to move into the next question. I mean, thinking about the model that CUPS employed and D-Impact and also IDPI, Ted, I wanted to pose a question to you in particular. You talked about in the beginning of your presentation sort of putting up a map of the different communities where your organization is working throughout New Mexico. And I guess, one question really is this type of work scalable? I mean, what cultural factors and considerations must be considered when thinking of replicating work in other communities? And can you share with us what you perceive to be replicable and what isn't?
Well, our basic tenets are really ideological. They're ideologically driven. So we know that within many of these communities, they already have projects that they have had ongoing. So it's not as if necessarily we're proposing anything new, but we're proposing a new way of actually being able to accomplish things. And this notion of Indigenous design and planning is very much informed by what we call the worldview. And that's really attached to this idea that if any people live successively for generations in the same place, then they begin to evolve and develop a worldview. Our context, however, is driven by the fact that we've had lots of imposition within our communities, essentially trying to transform us in what I call the other. So cultural identity is at the mainstay of exactly how it is that we like to sort of press and push people into rethinking who it is that they are and assuming in that sense sort of how they take charge and take control of the kind of development that's going over in their area. I was involved in a session just the other day with some Indian youth, and it was really interesting because we were relating some of these kinds of basic principles and talking about the roles of planners and architects and attaching them and asking their stories about the places that they live and what they liked and what they didn't like. But, one thing that always comes up is, well, then how do you measure success when you do these kinds of things? And oftentimes I think that especially funders and organizations and stuff always want to see these sort of hard, cold types of things. But when you're dealing with a transformative situation, to me, that mark of success was when I asked all these kids then, I said, how many of you want to design your own house? And every one of them enthusiastically raised their hands. So to me, that potentially becomes a transformative model because they're now certainly given that ability to sort of think that they can do it. And I think that's part of that engagement and that empowerment.
Great. And Ted, just to follow up on that, I'd love for you to address perhaps a couple of these questions from the audience because, the way that you talk about sort of that transformative model, how do you then translate your impact to funders or to garner support or capital resources to really make happen the projects that you envision through that facilitated process with the community?
Yeah, well, I guess the one thing that certainly is an indicator is they ask us back. So, it's always the situation of, how else can we kind of help them in order to be able to move towards the next level? Because we're talking about staging here, and in fact, we make no bones about the fact that when we look at the kind of conversations that we have, that we're really talking in terms of generational speak. And what that means is that unlike the sort of Euro-Western time frame, which certainly I'm trained in, that we look at projects in terms of 10 years, 20 years, and if we really reach out far, it's 50 years, we talk about it more from the standpoint of generation. What do you see 2, 3, 4 generations into the future? And imagine that you start something now and you're not going to be able to see it in your lifetime completed, and how do you build coherence towards that? So we really focus on how then we can begin to sort of start these initiatives, begin to stage them, and even though we're at the beginning, we're beginning to sort of see the role necessary in order to be able to also assist and leverage communities or help communities leverage the kind of funding that they might be able to get in order to be actually able to implement some of these kinds of things down the future.
Great. And Kate, there was a question directed directly to you on how you go about translating your impact to funders, given the work that you're doing primarily in India at this moment.
Yeah, I think it's a good question. It's I think I could answer that in a couple of different ways. I think one is by looking at both, qualitative and quantitative impact that you have. So as Ted talked about, sometimes the transformative work is a little bit harder to measure, but there's still ways you can measure. I mean, one of the things we look at as far as our impact is, has the organization, has the community that we're working with taken on design thinking as something that they can use to solve problems in the future. And so we measure that, we talk about that, we look at that, and we talk to funders about that by coming back afterwards and hearing their stories about how they might have used some of the tools that we've worked with them on in other applications. And that impact can be exponential. But then there's also qualitative or quantitative measurements, right? So a couple of our projects, like there's a project that we're working on that's a LADU project. So it's working on addressing malnutrition for real small kids that are underweight, and it's like a nutritional supplement that helps kids gain weight, and it's based on WHO guidelines. And so we're doing really, really quantitative measurement on that product. So we took 70 kids that we knew were going to be getting the LADU every day. We took baseline measurements before they were getting the LADU. They were, malnourished, and then tested them every 3 months, and have been able to demonstrate the impact of the design. And they've now, above where they should be, which has been pretty awesome to see. But so, that kind of data as well, we try and capture, and it's hard. I mean, data capture can be really time-consuming, and it can be, sometimes difficult to figure out. But I do think it's important not only for communicating to funders, but also for communicating to ourselves about what's working and what's not, and really learning. So it's something that we do, I say, spend quite a bit of our time on. Hopefully, did that help? Hopefully that helped answer the question. But
yeah, that's great. And just to sort of build on this conversation about how each of your organizations go about measuring success and communicating that success, we had the last panel was focused on storytelling and evaluation, and the recommendation was really about building the evaluation to the beginning of the process and taking stock throughout the design process to see how it was progressing and what unexpected lessons have been learned throughout it. So Christine, I think a question that would be really interesting to hear from you, just since you spoke about the street vendor project and how that's been out in the world for a couple years now, do you continually evaluate the project both within the design process but then at points after?
Yeah, definitely. And like Kate said, it's like partially quantitative, partially qualitative. Being a small nonprofit, I always say that we measure anything we can count. So that's sort of the starting point. So with these projects, we can count distribution. So, I usually know how many copies of posters have been distributed to community partners and their secondary partners, and then how many we've distributed. So that's one measure that we have. That's just like kind of the most basic thing that we can measure. But then we look at longer term things too. So what we do is we now have a pre-project evaluation where we do things like ask people to talk about how they perceive design, how they've used design in their work before, things like that. And then we do a post-project evaluation to see if that's shifted at all. But we also look at the impacts for the organization using our tools, because one of the things that's really tough about our work is that usually the impact happens after the project's done, so after our role in the project is done. And so the way that we handle that now is that we just follow up with everyone like once a year. So we usually wait to do a post-project. We'll do like a debrief at the end of the project, and then we'll wait a few months so the group has had time to do some distribution. We'll check in with them. And then after that, once a year, we'll follow up with all of our partners and say, hey, are you still using this? In what context? What are the reactions that you get? Have you had any specific wins in your organizing work through the use of this tool? And so we get a mix of just, the quantitative from checking in and finding out distribution numbers, and the qualitative from them telling us stories about how the tool is working.
Great. So we have sort of a fun question. I thought that it would be great to hear from all three of you. And that was, what do you all see as common themes or threads between these three projects and organizations that were talked about today? I think that's a great question. So I'll throw it back out to each of you as the panelists. Maybe start with Ted.
Well, gosh, I don't consider that to be a fun question, but okay. I think the common denominator is that people and community matter. And what I'm hearing essentially is that we should care about our places, and we should really respect the fact that people can create their own community and do it in a way that really is meaningful and based on their own local values.
Great. And Christine?
Yeah. One thing that I often talk about when I'm talking about our work and when I think about the trajectory of my own work, where I worked in community design before I came to CUP, is that I think that design is a tool of power, right? And that, it's a tool of expertise. And it seems to me that all of the work that we're doing is so much about taking that expertise and doing the hard work of putting it in the hands of communities so that they're empowered to actually use the expertise and kind of drive the design processes, and so that design becomes a tool in those communities.
And how about you, Kate?
Well, those are great responses, you guys. I really like what you just said. I really like what Ted said about, people and community matter, and that we need to listen to that. I really like what Christine said about, taking this expertise and putting it in the hands of communities. It's just crazy that a process that's this powerful and, it can drive innovation in so many ways, hasn't been in some of the places that it hasn't been, and I'm excited to be even just sharing this conversation with you all, because I think that we're all trying to get it into those places, and I think there's so much more work to be done. So it's exciting, and I think, what we have in common is we're all trying to use this thing called design and do something that helps communities find either something that's more sustainable or more feasible or more desirable for them, and I think that's a pretty exciting thing to be a part of. So, yeah.
Fantastic. Well, we're running short on time, so I just wanted to open it up to our guest panelists one last time if they had any additional comments to add on to that. I think that was a great question to pose towards the end of our conversation, really in talking about design as a tool to really empower communities. Presenters, do you have anything else to add?
Yeah, I have one sort of other thing just to sort of lend some other substance to. Our organization also works in curriculum areas. We're actually in the throes of developing a degree program in Indigenous design and planning. And then also, when we work with the professional community, particularly, say, the American Planners Association or other institutions like this, we're also looking at providing legitimacy to how it is that this particular ideology actually serves not just ourselves, but also can inform the kind of planning that's going on all over the world.
Great. Kate or Christine, any parting words?
No, just thanks so much for having us in this conversation.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I agree. Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, even just on what Ted said, I agree. The curriculum. I just saw the next topic for the next webinar is about curriculum development, something we're kind of, looking into as well and doing some of. And so I'll be looking forward to hearing how some of what we talked about today kind of bleeds into that third webinar. But yeah, thanks for the opportunity, and thanks for everyone for participating.
Well, thank you to our three inspiring panelists, Kate, Ted, and Christine. I've really learned a ton myself, as I am sure that the audience did as well, in ways to think about social impact design work, and found it very inspiring just to hear a little bit more about some of the projects you're working on and the ways in which you approach them. And thanks to all of you out there for joining this conversation. As I mentioned at the beginning, this webinar will be archived in the next few days and available for download at www.arts.gov under Podcasts, Webcasts, and Webinars section on our website. And I would like to invite you, as Kate mentioned, to join us for our next webinar on August 20th at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. The topic will be Educating the Next Generation of Social Impact Designers. Our host will be William Drentel, President of Winterhouse Institute and co-founder of Design Observer. Thanks to everybody out there, and have a great day.